Drive Home Reviews. Dun-dun. Bad joke, sorry. It's really late as I'm recording this. So I've mentioned this before, but it bears repeating. I love Bond movies. I am a huge Bond fanatic. I saw GoldenEye when I was in high school, and it was just blew my mind. I became an instant Bond fanatic and just absorbed everything I could. I watched all the movies that were out at that time, and I've watched all the ones that have been released since. I am just a huge Bond fan, and I don't think I've ever really been able to express that to its fullest degree here, because, you know, the one Bond movie that I've been able to review for this channel, that the only one that's been released in the time I've been doing this, was frankly the worst film in the entire series. And I'm including, you know, No Time, Die Another Day, View to a Kill, Moonraker. It's worse than all of them, you know, and so I don't think I've ever really been able to fully express how much of a Bond fan I am. And I think we have to acknowledge, and it's one of the things that this documentary really does a great job of expanding on, is just how big an influence Bond has been on popular culture. You know, it's a film franchise that has been around for 60 years, spanning 25 movies, 7 actors, and a whole lot of music. It's to a point where there are certain film franchises that at a certain stage, you can no longer judge them by the standards of the rest of the genre. You know, Star Wars, I think, is one. Disney animated films is another. I believe the Marvel Cinematic Universe is another. Odd that all 3 of those are now owned by Disney. That's a little creepy. Is one, and Bond is definitely one. Like, when a new Star Wars things come out, we don't judge it against other science fiction. We judge it against Star Wars, all the Star Wars that has gone before. Same thing with, at least in my case, you know, Marvel films. I don't judge Marvel films with the same eye that I view other comic book movies. I gauge them against the other Marvel films, right? And Bond films are more than just spy thrillers or action movies. They are a genre completely of their own. And when that happens, when a franchise does that, you have to kind of take a look at all of the pieces that go into it. And one of the major aspects of the Bond film is the music. The music is so indicative of the series, and I think the only one of those I can honestly say that about would, you know, oh, I guess it's not true, you know, Disney, the Disney animated films, we judge them by the music. That's an identifying factor in them. Star Wars has that incredible score, and the Bond films have a musical language that is completely unique to that series and that world, that has changed over the 60-year course of its existence, and yet has somehow remained completely unique. And that is something that is just totally mind-blowing when you really stop and think about it. And what's odd is that even for people like myself who are big Bond fans, and no doubt big fans of Bond music, I love the opening themes. I don't think we've ever really sat down and dedicated a huge amount of thought to that entire process, that huge aspect of these movies. And music is such an integral part of all visual storytelling, be it a TV show, a movie, a play, TikTok, YouTube. Music tells us things. We always talk about this when I go through Aristotle's list of elements of drama and how he included music in there. And I asked the students, how important do you think that is? And, they go, I don't think it's that important. It's like, really? Have you ever seen a movie without music? It's like, no, music is very important. And for films like these that are so much their own thing, that musical language that is established is so crucial to the success and the identity of those films. And this documentary decides it's actually going to take a look at the history of Bond, but viewed through the very specific lens of how the music is written and how the music has contributed to that. And that is such an interesting thing to do. You don't see that a lot. A few years ago when I reviewed the Fiddler on the Roof documentary, it'd be like saying, we're just going to do a documentary just on the songs. Not about their influence on the plot, not about the story itself, not about anything else, just the writing and performing of the songs. It's an odd thing to do, but you could totally do it. So that's what this documentary on Amazon Prime is going for, to take a look at the evolution of the Bond films through that very specific guiding point of the Bond music. And it is a fascinating documentary. If you are a Bond fan or a music fan or both, you got to check this out. Again, I always find it very difficult to determine how do you review a documentary, because Becca would probably be the better person to ask, because she loves documentaries and she's seen so many of them, whereas I kind of just pick and choose. But I guess one of the things that I use as a guiding point for how good the documentary is was, number one, did it give me information that I didn't already have? It's great to see a documentary that just kind of, it's not like a featurette on a DVD or something like that, that just kind of gives you a little bit of a blurb. It's a question of, does this give us unique information that we did not already possess? And in this case, yeah, there's a lot of really neat information that goes on here. Little tidbits, for instance, the fact that the Bond theme itself, the where that comes from is the gentleman who composed the score for Doctor No, was trying to find the theme, and he had written several musicals for the English stage, and the Bond theme is actually taken from one of the songs that he had written for a musical, and then another composer came in and did the very famous arrangement of it. So you probably never knew the Bond theme had lyrics at one point. Not in its Bond form, but the song that it was taken from had lyrics. So that's really fascinating to me. The fact that Michael Caine was the first person in history to hear the tune of Goldfinger. That Tom Jones had to hold on and nearly passed out when hitting that final note at the end of Thunderball. The writing process of some of the songs, it's late, I'm sorry. They tell us a great story about Paul McCartney writing the famous theme for Live and Let Die, and he and his band record it. They send the recording out, and the producer's like, okay, this is great, who are we going to get to sing it? And their representative is like, well, what about Paul? And he's like, well, what about this person? What about that person? Like, what about Paul? Basically trying very diplomatically to say, if Paul McCartney doesn't sing the song, you don't get the song. Things like the fact that the Nancy Sinatra version of You Only Live Twice had to be cobbled together from 20 different takes, because for some reason they allowed all these paparazzi and everything into the recording studio with them, and she was so distracted by the paparazzi, while she was trying to record, she couldn't get a full take. So the version we hear on all the recordings in the movie itself are, you know, all this hobbled together kind of jigsaw puzzle. So there's just a lot of really, really cool information. I like that they divide up between talking about some of the individual songs. Of course, they can't hit all of them. They can't go kind of song to song to song. Just there's too many in there. But they talk about the individual themes and the process of writing some of them, and getting some of the artists connected to how certain artists were selected and how other ones weren't, and all that kind of stuff. And also talking about the incidental music, the score, and how the theme influences the rest of the score, and how they make certain musical choices. For instance, they talk a lot about where to use the theme. They talk about Casino Royale and the musical decision to hold off on the classic Bond theme until the very end of the film. You know, when he shoots Mr. White in the knee and does the name's Bond, James Bond, and then they hit it. And then throughout the whole rest of the film, they decided, well, we're going to tease it a little bit. When Daniel Craig is looking in the mirror and seeing himself in the tuxedo for the first time, they give you a little tease of it. You know, they give you a little tease of it right at the beginning when he's right before the theme song hits. You know, you hear a lot of the da-da, you know, that, or things that are vaguely reminiscent of it. So it's a neat exploration of how the songs are used and how the music cues are used, and again, how that jazzy, I hate to say it, I don't know how to say it, but the Bond themes, I think because they came of age in the 60s and 70s, when, you know, of course, the sexual revolution was happening. I've always found there's a slightly dirty element to them. I don't want to say porn, but when you think of porn music, you think of that, you know, that kind of thing. And I've always felt like there's a little bit of that dirtiness in there, that, you know, that kind of thing. And they never touch on anything like that, but I've always felt that, you know, that quality of sex and sexuality was always a big part of the Bond themes. And it's just neat to hear how the influence of jazz, of big band music, of Indian music. The Bond theme, again, was first heard, the strums of it were heard on a sitar, you know, and then they kind of transferred it to a guitar and came up with it. So it's like just a lot of really cool information, and stories and anecdotes of just how these things were made. I will also say that it's interesting to watch. It's visually entertaining. I think a lot of documentaries can run into the problem of just, you know, talking heads, and visually it can become very dull. And it keeps moving. It uses the posters, it uses the artwork, it uses the clips, the interviews. It's all edited together very well, so it keeps your interest. I have to say, though, there are two things about this documentary that I did not like. And one of them is a personal opinion, which, again, all reviews really are, but I think in this case it really is more of a personal bias than it is an actual critique. So I'm going to say take this first critique with a grain of salt. One of the things I really hated about this movie this documentary is that it kept, for long chunks, it kept cutting back to talk about No Time to Die and the Billie Eilish theme and the score. And again, this is a personal taste thing, but that just irritated the hell out of me. One, because No Time to Die, again, is the worst Bond movie ever. and they keep talking about it like it's this brilliant fucking film. You know, I got the feeling half the time like I was watching less of a documentary on Bond films and more of a sales pitch for this film. You know, like they were trying to convince us all that it wasn't a dull, boring slog. You know? That it really was this masterpiece, and the music was so beautiful and perfect. They make a big deal of talking about how Hans Zimmer, you know, scattered the Bond theme throughout the film, and oh, how genius that was. And then they immediately talk about how they do that in all the Bond films. But they're so desperate to try to make No Time to Die look good that they completely contradict themselves. And I am sorry. If you enjoy her music, then more power to you. But the Billie Eilish Bond theme is one of the most unlistenable pieces of crap. I have to say, you know, one of the things they talk about, and I do agree with this, is that if you listen to the Bond themes kind of chronologically, they are a musical time capsule. You know, showing the evolution of musical styles throughout their various incarnations, you know, from the 60s inspirations to the Sean Connery films, to the 70s with, you know, Roger Moore, the influence of the 90s techno, with the Pierce Brosnan films. And they talk about all 5 of the Daniel Craig films. And I bring this up at this point because, yes, it is a musical timeline, which may explain why I cannot stand the last 3 out of 5 Bond themes. The Quantum of Solace, Spectre, and No Time to Die themes are repugnant. They are just unlistenable. The singers all sound like they're having their fingernails ripped out. And I know that that's the style of singing that's big at this point in history. That doesn't mean it's good. All right, so again, this is a personal take. I must highlight that. If you liked No Time to Die, or if you like Billie Eilish's music, and you liked the theme, fine. Personal preference. But for me, what it felt like to me is, again, going back, I remember one of the things I didn't like about the Fiddler on the Roof documentary that I mentioned a little bit ago is the fact that every time Lin-Manuel Miranda came on, he always had to make it all about him. It always felt like every interview he gave was all about him. He had to talk about, you know, the production of it he did when he was in grade school. Okay, fine and dandy. But then he has to go on this big, long diatribe about how he had to dance to Life at his wedding, and he and his father-in-law choreographed the whole thing, and he got the idea. It's like, what the fuck does this have to do with anything? But it's all there just so he can kind of talk about how great he is, you know? And it felt, that's what these extended sections felt like. Let's talk about how great Hans Zimmer and Billie Eilish is. And Hans Zimmer is a brilliant composer. Don't get me wrong, but that music was nothing special because that movie was nothing special. So, again, personal opinion, all the way. The one thing, excuse me, the other thing I did not like about this film, it really bugs me, is that it completely ignores the Timothy Dalton films. Completely. Doesn't mention them once. And that is unforgivable, in my opinion. Especially if you're trying to do a comprehensive history of these things. Yes, he only did 2 of them, but George Lazenby only did 1, and they included that. And again, I understand you can't talk about every theme. You can't go through all of them. That would take too long. But they do an entire section where they talk about how the main Bond theme orchestrally was altered for each of the subsequent decades. They talk about, you know, the original theme, how when they moved to the Roger Moore films, they became a little bit more disco-inspired. And then they completely skip the 80s and the 2 Timothy Dalton films and go right to the techno stuff of the Pierce Brosnan version. And, okay, if you don't want to talk about License to Kill or Living Daylights, the theme songs, okay, again, I get it, there's not a lot of time. But you completely skip over the new orchestrations for the Timothy Dalton films in this timeline where you're trying to illustrate a point. And they did, I remember very clearly that they had a different orchestration with electric guitar, which was very indicative of the 80s music style. So you're trying to prove this point and you completely bypass these 2 films? And that, to me, I don't know why that was. Maybe they needed more time to kiss Billie Eilish's ass and Hans Zimmer's ass. But it's like, I don't know, that feels like such a slap in the face to Timothy Dalton and his run as Bond, which is shitty because everybody discounts his Bond, and his Bond was pretty damn good. I don't care what anybody says. Living Daylights and License to Kill are good Bond movies. Matter of fact, I will go you one better. I would put I would put License to Kill in my list of top 10, maybe top 5 Bond films of all time. And if you're one of those people who's about to come at me and tell me Timothy Dalton sucks and all this, if you're going to go all love and tyranny on me for this, let me just ask you a question. How's it feel being wrong all the time? Does it make you sad? Do you cry a lot? Because you're wrong. I don't normally say that, but if you're going to give me this, oh, Timothy Dalton's Bond movie sucks. No, they didn't. They were awesome. Living Daylights was a bit convoluted. I will give you that. But License to Kill, awesome. And they both had great theme songs. But again, you're not going to talk about the orchestration of the main theme in those films. Yeah, they do not touch on it at all. And I think that is a glaring oversight. So I really hated that. And it made me, as you can tell, it's made me very, very upset. Again, maybe they did at one point, it got cut, but I don't know. It's a slap in the face. So those are 2 kind of big complaints I have on this documentary. But those aside, and those being true, the documentary itself is solid. It's entertaining, a lot of good information, and it's great to revisit the Bond themes, and really kind of explore how big of an impact they have had on music in movies, and once again, the use of musical language to establish a world, you know, and just what goes into that. And I think especially in a film series as long-running as this one, which has had numerous composers and numerous artists contributing to it. I think it is a kind of fascinating thing that these songs and this music has all stayed, has all evolved, and it's all its own thing, and each one is unique to the film, and yet they all feel connected. They all feel like they belong in that world, with the obvious exception of Die Another Day's Madonna's Techno Vomit. It's the only one of those film themes that I honestly think is worse than any of the other ones I've talked about. And they kind of give it a passing wink. They mention it, but they don't linger on it because it's fucking awful. And I don't think, that's one I don't think anyone's going to disagree with me on. You don't hear a lot of people going, that Die Another Day theme is the best Bond theme ever. Yeah, fuck that. So yeah. Yeah, I think that's pretty much it. It's a great documentary. It was really well done. So let's wrap this up. So, final grade for The Sound of 007. Boring title, by the way. They could have done something different with that. I would have called it Nobody Does It Better, the sounds of 007 or the music of 007. I think that's what I would have gone with, or something like that. But anyway, so final grade for the sounds of 007. I'm going a solid B on this one. Again, good information, fun to watch, entertaining. Some personal choices that at best annoyed me and at worst completely pissed me off, but you know, what are you going to do? Again, if you are a Bond fan, or if you are a fan of scores and music history, then I think this is something you should really check out. It was a good watch, and I enjoyed it. Made me want to watch Bond films, which it doesn't take a lot to make me want to watch a Bond film. So there you go. So all right, so that's it. So thank you for coming with me. Thanks for joining me. And as always, drive safe, and I will see you at the movies.